Good morning. How's it going?
It's a good night here. Everything is
Yeah,
good. How are you doing?
doing great. How are you?
I'm good. So I thought to tell about you and the work that you are doing to my audience and the work that you already did.
Okay, sounds great.
So before that, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Jeff Brown. Been working in IT about 15 years now, all the way from answering phone calls on a help desk, systems admin, all the way up to doing some consulting now, primarily out in Azure. So, um, yeah, wide range of things that I've gone through there to get to that point, but I'm excited to talk to you about it.
So you're from?
I'm originally from Oklahoma, kind of the middle America there, but recently moved up to the state of Washington. A little bit of a change there in scenery and everything. It's really quite beautiful out here.
So you're a cloud engineer and a DevOps engineer. That's your present job.
Yes, more focused on the cloud right now, but a little bit of some DevOps things in there. So primarily, I work for a Microsoft. Well, they're a much bigger consulting company. They do AWS, Google, uh, uh, Microsoft, Azure and everything. They really encompass a lot of different technologies, but primarily right now, working in Azure. And what I do is work with different customers to either help them get started with Azure. So maybe they're new to it and looking to get started right, avoid pitfalls, make sure they do everything, as best they can from the start, or assisting companies with a specific project. Maybe they're wanting to migrate from on-premises, help them migrate up into the cloud, or help them go into their existing environment. Maybe they've already had Azure for a little bit, but they're looking to have someone come in and just review the environment and say, what could we be doing better? Or we want to move this specific application up into Azure. What would that look like? And may just be planning, architecting for them, or actually going through and helping them, uh, do the implementation and everything.
So you're into this role from?
Sorry, what was the question again?
You are into this role from?
Yeah, I've been in this role. I've been a consultant for about 6 years now, but I've been focused on Azure just about the last year, actually. Prior to that, I did a lot of Microsoft Teams, which evolved from Sky for Business. And I really got started in consulting, working with Sky for Business, Link Server on premises. And Microsoft at the time had uh, Sky for Business online, but it wasn't quite the same as it was on premises. So a lot of companies weren't moving towards it because it was still lacking some features and customizing that they needed for to meet their organization's needs and everything. But then Microsoft came out with Teams, and naturally, all of us Sky for Business people moved into Teams and everything because they finally announced, this was going to be the replacement product for it. But I was working in Microsoft Teams, and I was like, consulting in here is great and everything. There's some challenges, but there's not a lot you can control because it's a cloud application. It's Microsoft does a lot of the stuff for you, so I didn't really see it much of as a challenge. So that's when I started looking at Azure and trying to skill up in that area. And I also like writing code. I'm not a full blown software developer or anything like that or engineer, but um, working with Exchange, working with Sky for Business, everything, there's lots of PowerShell. And I liked scripting and everything like that. And that's where getting into the DevOps was intriguing for me because there's lots of automation, which I also enjoy trying to automate things and solve those puzzles, writing code, and then going through and there's lots of just code writing and everything and trying to solve trying to solve problems with code. So that's where that that's what kind of gradually got me into Azure and DevOps and everything.
So you're into this role since 1 year. So I'm sure you might have experienced a lot of things from a lot of different customers. Like you said, uh, some people wants to have a architecture for their work, and some people are very new to this, and they want your help. So how is that? How many people came with how many ideas to you?
So far, well, I've been working side in Azure. Started out, kind of the first project was helping a customer move. They had a very legacy application, like back on like maybe like an IBM mainframe or something like that, very old like accounting software, and they were working with a company to modernize it and put it into the cloud. Um, and so my role there was, sometimes it depends on the project that you work on. There can be lots of different moving parts and people. So in this case, I had a very small, I won't say small, but specific role where, there were the application developers. They were giving the requirements of what the application needed in the cloud and everything. And then there was an architect coming up with the design a little bit and putting the little pieces together. And then my job was to go deploy it, writing out ARM templates for Azure, which is Azure's native infrastructure as code language, and deploying that out for them and doing a lot of the configuration afterwards. Then the interesting thing about that project is, moving to the cloud has different, can look different for a lot of different people. Sometimes you might want to take advantage of native things out in Azure, like Azure App Services and functions and things like that, to modernize your application and everything. But in this case, we were just building virtual machines and putting the application on them, kind of like traditional on-premises kind of type of architecture. And so we're building lots of virtual machines, lots of networking to go with it. And so that was really exciting, just diving into ARM templates and everything and getting to deploy that. And then another project I've worked on is very similar. A company had an on-premises application. They weren't quite seeing, it wasn't scaling very well for their needs inside their company anymore. They did have it out in Azure, and but it was still kind of slow performance, still running on virtual machines and everything. And so we came in, me alongside a networking person, as well as a software developer. We were to kind of look at this program and tackle it and be like, how can we make this better? What would it look like differently, maybe in the cloud? And what it really came down to was, it was just kind of, I won't say old software, but it was just, it was software that had been around a long time. And the software developer really dug into the code and everything and said, there are a couple of things we can do better here, but I analyzed the performance of the virtual machines and the disks and networking out in Azure, and Azure wasn't the bottleneck. It really was the software. So it was actually a really good example of, you can't just take an application, put it on a virtual machine in the cloud, and it's magically better. It's that the cloud isn't a silver bullet for everything. It's not just going to automatically fix everything. But we did come up with maybe a slightly alternative design, because they required a lot of storage to store files and everything. And they were still looking at it as, here's a server, I'm going to attach a whole bunch of disks to it and put file shares on that disk. And it's like, well, if you need file storage, there's Azure Storage and there's Azure File Shares that can replace that. So you don't have to manage all these disks and everything. Here's just a big bucket of storage, and you just pay for what you need. So that was, like I mentioned, that was a really good example of, the cloud's not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all your problems. It's not going to magically make software better or anything. You still have to architect things and do things maybe a little bit differently. And then right now I'm primarily working on a long-term project. It's almost like where we're just going in and helping them set up Azure, deploy different things out in their kind of just whatever their needs come up. It's not, a specific project. It's just helping them get out into Azure and put more things into Azure. They've had a big turnaround and focused on making things cloud first. So always looking to the cloud to deploy something first. And it's been really great. Been working a lot in Terraform, doing automatic deployments, working with Git and source control and everything. So it's been really great to see the all these individual things that I've been learning about, kind of put them all together into this pipeline and everything, and make them and get them deployed out there. So it's been a really great, really awesome experience.
So you're a consultant and you're a programmer, little bit of programmer, and also you are an architect. So 3 different jobs. So how this experience and this knowledge for you came from with the experience with the works that you did before?
Yeah, it's really just a culmination of 15 years of just going through everything. I wouldn't call myself a programmer per se, but lots of scripting, and that goes back to back in college, where I actually started out in college as like a music major, playing an instrument and everything, and I decided that wasn't for me. So I started taking classes at a local community college. I'd always been interested in computers and everything, and I took a beginning programming course in Pascal, which is, not a language really used anymore, but I just thought it was awesome. It's like I could write out this code and it puts something, I can make the computer do something. But I wasn't interested in being a programmer. And I kind of wish if I could go back, I would do that again. I would more focus on the programming because everyone's a software developer now. But I went into the systems administration side, and that's where, started getting experience building servers, a little bit of networking, doing automation, writing scripts to deploy things for you. Started out in VB script, which has evolved into PowerShell, which is the main thing for Windows systems administrators and everything. And then it's just being exposed to different environments and seeing how different people do things is what will eventually help you, because along the way you'll eventually be like, oh, I've seen this before. Here's what we've done before to solve this problem, and just take that experience and be able to apply it to your current problem that you're having. So it was just I would put myself as kind of the consultant first, and then the architect programmer type stuff a little bit second and third. It's pretty close there, but just mainly just I like the building part of it. We have a problem, let's solve the problem. More often than not, it's written out in code, like I mentioned at this point, to deploy it, and then just moving on, trying to make it better and automate it. And it just comes through exposing yourself, and that's why I originally wanted to become a consultant, because I had worked in roles where you're working in your environment, and that's almost all you know, and that's all you're exposed to and have experience against. And I wanted to broaden that experience. And instead of, going from, one like corporate IT type job from another to another to another, I was like, well, once you become a consultant, you work on smaller projects. I won't say smaller projects, but they're more confined. They might be 3 to 6 months. You get into a customer's environment, you learn their environment a little bit, you have a specific challenge to solve, and then you move on. And that's constantly changing. You go to this customer, and they have something a little bit different. So you've got to change, and you just kind of rack up that experience after a while. So that's, you talk about the different experiences. That's why I want to be more on the consulting side, is because you're always exposed to something different environment, different customer, different set of requirements, different technologies. And that just slowly helps expand that experience for sure.
So, as a consultant, as a architect, how you look at problem?
I always look at a problem. There might be this huge thing that you're looking at, But at the end of the day, you're just like, what are we trying to accomplish? What's the end goal with what we're trying to do? And you can start with a solution. You can be like, all right, here's the solution. And then I step back and look at it and go, okay, what is that a sustainable solution? Is that going to be easy to manage in the future? And you start trying to think about these things like, yeah, I could do this, we could hook this thing up here, here, and here. But that's kind of complicated. How can we simplify? And I always go for simplicity. What's the easiest way to get there? The easiest way that's going to maintain it in the long run. And then, but also make it, I'm trying to think of the word, not super strict, I guess, because you don't want to get narrowly focused into one path. And if you have to change something in the future, you're just like, oh no, we're going to have to start from scratch on this. It's got to be able to be malleable and everything to go into a different direction. But I think that's my key thing is always simplicity. How can I make this simpler? How can I make this repeatable and manageable? Especially, writing a script or, a small program or something like that. Just always think about. So, I might have this solution and I go, okay, we've solved this problem, and then start chipping away at it. How can I make it better? How can I do it better and simpler and easier? And that slowly evolves over time. And then you finally put it out there. And even when you put it out there, you sometimes immediately go, oh, yeah, I could have done this better. But that's my philosophy, is just how do we keep it simple and manageable long term?
So you started your role as a network management specialist, IS network management specialist. You did this for 4 years.
Yeah, that was really my first. The role you don't see before that is I was working at Dell, taking incoming phone calls from home users. Home users call in, they've got a problem with their laptop or their desktop, and trying to troubleshoot and dispatching parts and things like that. But it was all on the phone. I wasn't doing any hands-on. I'm a very hands-on person. So I managed to get this role. It was basically a systems administrator. That was the network management specialist. That was the fancy, official title. But I was a junior systems administrator. And so in that role is where I really got to, this really shaped a lot of things where I am now, because it was for a government agency, which we're always limited by budget. So we're always having to come up with creative solutions for things, reuse old equipment, just basically trying to come up with a way of how to do things with the limited resources that we had. So there's lots of, my boss at the time, he was a great batch script writer for Windows, the Windows command line and everything. And that's where I learned VB script and really got into scripting and just being able to solve problems without having to go buy some software solution. So that was really great, and got exposed to a lot of things. When I started in that first year, that's when the newer version of Exchange 2007 server came out. Windows Server 2008 came out, so there was domain controller upgrades that I got to participate in. So it was actually like a really good time when I started, because lots of these new Microsoft products that we had and relied on came out. Working with SQL Server, working with laptop and desktop imaging automation. So it was a really good. I got exposed to a lot of different things in that role that's still serving me today.
Great. And after that, you worked as a system administrator.
Right. So that's where I started looking around, and at that last job I was at, I started looking around. I started looking at job openings or job descriptions, I was seeing lots of technologies. I had no idea what they were. I'd never worked with VMware. This was still virtualization was starting to gain speed and everything. There's stuff about Citrix, Zen Desktop. Never worked with virtual desktops. So it was starting to become a very popular. So I managed to land this role where I got to work with VMware, and it was a very different environment because the previous environment, it was, I won't say the wild, wild west. You often hear that in IT, just anything goes. We pushed out patches all the time. There was no change control, nothing like that. So then in this role is very different in that there was documentation, there were some policies and procedures. We had scheduled patch rollouts, and so that was also really good because then now I had to pay attention to these things. And then I got really exposed into VMware a little bit. It was a small environment, but still got to mess with it. I got VMware certified at the time, went to the class and everything, which was great, and really dove into that technology. And then got to do some interesting projects. Actually got to look at how to set up a disaster recovery environment, kind of what that looks like. And I got to build that out. Even though it was a smaller organization than my previous role, it was really advanced in a lot of ways, especially because they worked in healthcare. So there was, encryption standards we had to follow, had to work with, and that's where the policies and procedures came in because you have to have all this stuff documented and be able to answer for it. So yeah, again, that was just another great role of, there were some things that were a complete 180 from the last role that then I had to adjust for and be able to be able to work with. But I got to modernize my skills. I felt like a little bit, getting into VMware, and a little bit like designing some disaster recovery things in an offsite network and everything.
Great. And before that, you worked as after that you worked as a IT services professional, network and unified collaboration at Devon Energy for 3 years.
Yeah. So in that last role we were just talking about, I started looking around, and those two roles I had worked at is, like I mentioned, I got to touch on a lot of things. I got to learn a lot of different technologies. But you hear that analogy of like it was a mile wide but an inch deep was like my knowledge. I knew a little bit about a lot of different things, but I didn't feel like an expert. Not an expert, but like I hadn't gone in depth into anything. And that's when I started thinking about at this stage in my career, I wanted to. I'll admit it. I wanted to maximize my salary and compensation. So I started thinking, well, maybe I get into consulting. You become that expert in a handful of things, and people come to you to do those things. So when I was leaving that role, I was doing one of two things. I wanted to either get into VMware, like virtualization and everything, or my thinking at the time was every organization has email. And the standard at the time, on premises was Microsoft Exchange Server. So if I could get a job in either one of those two, I felt like it would get me started down that role of becoming a consultant. So I managed, I got into the role as an IT services professional, which is, again, fancy title for systems administrator. Organizations have all their different titles and everything. And that's where I really got to focus on Exchange Server and Link Server, which eventually came Skype for Business Server. And it was great. I really got to dive into those technologies and really learn them inside and out. I worked on certifications. They had the Microsoft messaging and communications certifications. And so I dug into those. That was the first time I'd really done a lot of home lab stuff. Prior to that, I wouldn't say much of a home lab. So I, bought equipment and did, virtualization and spun up a small home environment of Active Directory servers and Exchange server and a Sky for Business link server or whatever, and just setting it up, testing things, and that's really where I got started and down my consultant role. It was getting into those specific technologies, and moving from role to role is, I've talked about you learn different things and it's different environments. Devon Energy is a huge company. The prior company I worked for, I think maybe had 80 people or so. We hovered right around there, and now I'm moving into thousands of employees. And just like in my role, I was specializing in Exchange and Link server. There are other teams specializing in identity, an Active Directory or security or SQL Server, or there's dozens of app developers and everything. And so that's where I had to learn I was no longer in control of everything inside the IT department, because the two previous roles, I was domain admin. I could go create accounts if I needed something. I didn't have to wait on somebody else to go do that. So that's where I learned how to really work in a large organization. And sometimes you don't have control over everything that you want. You have to be like, hey, I need a user identity to go do this, and you have to fill out a request and wait for the response. And it's somebody else's responsibility to go set up the SQL servers. It's not my responsibility anymore. So that was another learning experience of working inside a large organization, and not to say it in a bad way, but to kind of know your place a little bit inside of it. It's like, here's my application, here's my servers and my little environment, but I can't just go changing something on somebody else's. I have to go consult with them, and a much stricter change control environment where you actually have to show up to a meeting about change control once a week and talk about the change that you need so everyone else is aware of it. Previously, if I wanted to make a change, I'd be like, hey, turn to the other sysadmin. Hey, I'm going to make this change. Just FYI, if you see something go wrong. He's like, okay. And then you go make the change. So again, it was a lot more formalized environment and trying to work with that. But it was also, when you get into a larger environment like that, where people have their specific roles and knowledge areas, you get to meet some really smart people. That's where some of the best people I've worked with before in networking or just virtualization, VMware, just even we had a dedicated storage guy managing petabytes of storage and everything, and be able to just listen to them and talk and just absorb their thinking and everything was really, really great. So yeah, that was a great experience, and that was getting that detailed, in-depth knowledge and experience on just the specific products that I was working on is what led into the role of getting into consulting finally, which was my goal.
Great. And after that, you worked as senior technical consultant at Perficient for 1 year.
Yes. So that's where that company had actually reached out to me and said, hey, we're looking for a consultant. And that's where I was like, okay, this is finally, the past 3 or 4 years of work that I've been putting in towards becoming a consultant finally started to pay off. And I did get the role at that time, but I kept an eye on the company, and they had another role come open. So I reached out and, pestered them a little bit. I'm like, hey, I see that you're hiring again, and managed to get the role at that time. So that's where I started getting into consulting, specifically on Link server and Sky for Business server, helping organizations on premises either deploy it or do migrations, or just help them with their existing environment and everything, doing health checks, doing testing and everything. And that was actually right around the time, I have to look and everything, but I think Microsoft Teams had maybe just started coming out. Microsoft did have Sky for Business Online, but like I mentioned earlier, wasn't fully featured, wasn't customizable, really had lots of limitations, which was keeping people not moving to it just yet. But then you start seeing Microsoft Teams come out and you're like, oh, what's this? Oh, it's a nice little chat program. Okay. Oh, they're adding calling to it now. Okay. And maybe some meeting stuff. And you're like, okay, so, what's going on here? But I actually, at the time, I didn't pay too much attention to it because I was still focused on developing my on-premises Sky for Business server skill set and getting more and more in depth into it. So yeah, that was a good role where I started to learn the consulting side of it. And one of the things I hadn't thought about with consulting, and I think this might be good to share, is you work a corporate IT job and maybe you're salaried or whatever, and you work your 40 hours a week or so. There's occasional after hours or patching and stuff like that. When you're super busy, you might be working a lot of that, slower times of the year during project times. Let's be honest, you're maybe not doing as much IT stuff. There's downtime. There's maybe some opportunity for learning or just, planning and everything like that within the environment. When you get into consulting, especially for a consulting firm or whatever, there's this idea of billable hours. You have to bill a certain number of hours per week. And usually the goal that I've seen is 75 to 80% of your time. So, I'm not sure how it is everywhere else, but in the US at least, we average, we have a 40-hour work week that's full time. So if you think about 80%, that's 32 hours. So every week you're expected to bill 32 of your 40 hours to the customer. But the flip side of that is you also have to have enough work to bill those hours and enough customers, and that's not always within your control. And that can be very frustrating sometimes, and it's always a frustration sometimes. You might be working on a project where they scoped it out and said, you'll be working on this project full time, so that's 40 hours a week. But you're working with the customer and you're waiting on them. You've gotten to a stopping point with something and you're like, I need the customer to do these 2 or 3 things. But I can't do any work until they're done with those things. So you're not billing hours and you're not meeting your utilization goal. You're not getting your bonuses or anything like that. So that was kind of the side of consulting I never thought about and hadn't experienced yet. So in that role, that's really started getting, kind of learning that side of the business of being a consultant for a company and understanding how that side of it works. Those again, got to work with some really great people that were, had been working with Sky for Business and Link and voice deployments and were super into it. And it was great to work with them. Just, again, honing that skill set a little bit more and then trying to navigate how to actually be a consultant. Again, just like in the last role at Devon, not having access to everything, sometimes companies you go into a consulting project and the company may not give you access to their environment. You're just telling them what to do or giving them the things or having to look over their shoulder while they do things. And that was also just completely foreign. It's like, man, if I could just get in there and do this, we'd be all right. But, sometimes companies keep consultants at arm's length or you have limited, permissions to do everything. So then again, it's navigating, trying to get the customer to do these things. And, they're busy, just like everyone else. And so sometimes working on this or that is not always the priority sometimes. So yeah, that was the first experience of really getting to be a consultant and learning that side of the business and, learning how to interact with the customers and work within the project and the confines of everything.
Great. And after that, you worked as a premier field engineer at Microsoft for 2 years.
Yes. So back when I was working at Devon, we had a premier field engineer or a PFE, as were sometimes called or shortened, from Sky for Business. He was Sky for Business expert, and I always thought that would be interesting. Be like, man, go work for Microsoft, in the product, with the company that makes the product. They own the product, they've developed and built the product, and be able to go work for them and help other customers with that same product. Sky for Business at this time would be really, really cool. So, got contacted by a recruiter, and went through the interview process and everything, and was excited to get it. And this is where Microsoft Teams is continuing to increase in popularity and everything. So was transitioning and ramping up my Sky for Business skills into Microsoft Teams and learning that technology and more. They're very similar. I had to learn a couple of nuances and things like that of how it was different and how to work with it. The Premier Field Engineer role is sort of like a consultant. There are two different kinds, I guess. There are the PFEs who go out and they do assessments all the time, or they might give workshops or teach workshops, for customers and everything like that. And there were other ones that are more consultant-like, even though Microsoft has a completely different consulting arm in business and everything, and people who fulfill that role. The PFE was almost kind of consultant role. And that's where I was dedicated to a handful of customers, helping them with their environments and their projects, and trying to get them. The goal was to help them get their environments as healthy as possible, be more proactive instead of reactive, because if you can make their environment better and keep on top of things, they have less issues, they call into support less, which is better for Microsoft, to not have support calls and everything like that. The difference in that role, though, from a consultant, is customers would pre-buy your hours, basically. So again, I was mentioning before where as a consultant, you're expected to bill so many hours per month or per day or per week or whatever, on average. But that's more of you're billing as you go and racking up those hours. Whereas in the role I was at as the PFE, customers would pre-buy hours, and you had a max of 1,600, which was supposed to be full time. So they might buy 400, 800, or full 1,600 hours. And then you start trying to burn those hours in the year. So you're kind of against the clock of trying to bill enough, trying to get them to use these hours as much as possible. And I found that really difficult because, again, some customers didn't have a lot going on, or they had some pretty good environments. And you're just providing advice every now and then. You try to get them to take a workshop or a class, which could reduce those hours, or use up those hours or whatever. But I actually found it really difficult, and that was the first time in a role where I didn't feel successful, and I wasn't. I'll be honest, I wasn't that good at it. So it was really kind of stressful a little bit, and ended up not liking that particular role because just like I mentioned before, as a consultant, you don't always have access to the person's environment to be able to do things. As a premier field engineer, I had zero access. I wasn't allowed to work in their environment at all. I could give them scripts, I could tell them things to do, I could say, here's what we should do, but it was completely on the customer to go do it. So it was super, super hands off, which I didn't like. I had environments that I could, lab environments from Microsoft or my own, where I could do things to test things out. But yeah, so it was super hands off, trying to get, to meet the hours and everything. Just wasn't successful. And that's where kind of, it was interesting because, like I said, I'd kind of looked at being this PFE at Microsoft as like kind of the pinnacle maybe a goal in the long term, and I got there. I ended up not liking it, and that's going to happen. Sometimes you don't know until you get there that this isn't for me. So that's when I started to try to pivot more into DevOps and the Azure side of things. So one, being at Microsoft was great. They also do Azure. That's their other thing. So I had access to some training and doing certifications, and I just started trying to reskill and learn something new.
And you came into Rackspace Technology, and you worked there for 1 year, 6 months.
Yeah, so that was I know I just mentioned that I was trying to get into Azure and to more DevOps and everything. And I was trying to find a way to get back to almost doing server management, almost on premises or whatever. Rackspace, they had hosted Exchange. They provided hosted Exchange services for customers. So almost like what Office 365 does. It's like, hey, I need an Exchange mailbox. I need email. You can go to Microsoft and buy it. You could do the same thing with Rackspace. They had their own hosted Exchange, or they even had their own proprietary hosted email service for even like a small business who doesn't need all the bells and whistles. Anyway, I had applied for a role to kind of go manage that because I was like, I felt like this would give me back that server sysadmin experience that I had been missing. And I had a great manager. He interviewed me for the role, or I met with him initially, and he was like, you know what? I don't think you want to do that role. I have a professional organization services or professional delivery services team, and we could really use a Teams person. They had lots of email people doing email migrations and some identity Active Directory stuff like that. But do you want to come do some Teams stuff with me? And I was like, I kind of hesitated at first because I was trying to get out of the Teams world and doing that type of work. But I decided to go ahead and do it because it just seemed like it would be a good opportunity. And looking at the company, they did lots of different things, lots of other professional services for Azure, AWS, DevOps, things like that. So I decided to do it, and it was a ton better than I thought it was going to be. I got to work on another great team, and I finally got to take a lot of the team stuff I had been learning, especially around voice and providing voice services inside of Teams, and finally put it into use and got to build and do a lot of really cool projects. So even though I was trying to get out of Teams, I actually really enjoyed that role because I finally got to take a lot of the stuff I learned at Microsoft and finally put it hands-on and help some customers. So again, that was kind of unexpected. I ended up really enjoying it. But again, I started refocusing. I had that conversation with my manager, who was totally supportive of it, of trying to get into Azure, into DevOps. And so I applied internally for a role as a DevOps engineer, with my current manager's full support, and managed to then finally transition into working inside of Azure. And that was some of the projects I was talking about earlier, the old mainframe application. So that's where, I guess, trying to think about like career advice and everything, because at the time, before I finally got into that DevOps engineer role, I'd been putting out tons of applications for Azure, DevOps, anything I could get on, and was just getting nothing back. No callbacks, no interviews really. So if anyone's looking to like get into a new role like that, sometimes you have to just, if you can, I would say look closer to you. Is there something in my present company, if it's large enough, can I do something different? And that's finally what worked for me, was looking inside of the current company and be like, oh, instead of going externally and not getting any callbacks, let me go internally, and I can just maybe switch roles within the company here. And that's what I was finally able to do.
So all different roles in different companies, how all these roles are helping you to do the present consulting and architecting and some part of programming job?
Yeah, it's just like I mentioned, everything I've done before starts to come back. You know, you write a lot of PowerShell code. I wrote a lot of PowerShell code for Exchange and Link and Sky for Business Server and everything. And that same skill set of PowerShell script writing and following best practices continues with you, even if the technology that you're programming against changes. So now I'm doing a lot of Azure programming or PowerShell script writing, but those same concepts still apply of following best practices and reading up and understanding those things. And then those same ideas move into when you're writing Terraform code of how can I make it simple and repeatable and easy for someone else to later come in and look at it and go, oh, okay, I see what's going on here and be able to understand it. And then always had a guy that I worked with at a previous job. He always questioned everything and always challenged everything. I don't quite have his personality like that, but it does help to just kind of look and say, why are we doing this, and are we following what's the best way to do this? Not the best way, but is this in the best interest of everyone and how we're doing it? So yeah, it's just even things. It may not seem like the things that you'd worked on before will come back again, but it does. It just kind of builds over time, just little things here and there. Even practically, like you'll have an old script that you wrote, be like, man, I feel like I've done this before. So you keep all that stuff that you've worked on and go reference it again and bring it up and to be able to write a new piece of code or something like that. So yeah, it's just a slow progression of taking all those things from the past and being able to just keep applying it in new situations.
So at last, what do you say to the people, to the tech industry people who are watching this video and audio from anywhere on this planet as a cloud engineer and DevOps engineer?
Yeah, I would say just always be curious, because going back to my first role that we talked about, my first systems administrator role. When I worked in that role, I was only focused on what I needed to know to do my job. I really didn't, see what was going on in the industry. That's why, wasn't super familiar with virtualization. Didn't know that's where things were trending. I think it's a lot easier now. This was that was 2007, 2012. I don't think Twitter was a big thing. A lot less online communities, so there's a lot of opportunities now, I think, for just that's somewhere where I've struggled in my career is kind of looking out and seeing what's coming and not try to predict it, but just kind of be familiar with it and to know what's going on. And then it's easier now than it has been before to learn new things and have access to them. There's AWS, there's Azure, there's a lot of free things you can do in there that cost you very little money. I don't think I've ever spent more than $5 or $10 in a month in Azure billing, because I'll build stuff, I'll go, okay, that worked, and then I just tear it right back down, to avoid as much billing as possible. Back when I was learning a lot of the Exchange and Sky for Business Server stuff on premises, I had to buy a computer and disks and lots, enough processing power to do all that. And now if I wanted to go do that, I could just go spin it up real quick and then tear it back down and it'd be minimal cost. But I was in an interview once back then with a guy, and he asked if what I knew about VMware and virtualization. And I was like, well, we don't use that at my current job, so nothing really. And he was like, who cares? Like, go download a trial version of something and put it on your machine. And that really clicked in my head. I was like, oh, yeah, I guess I could go do that. Never really thought about it. I didn't know that was possible because I networked and talked with other IT professionals and just didn't have that curiosity almost a little bit. So I would just say stay curious, stay aware of what's going on kind of in the industry around you, or at least in your little area, and find a way to, if there's something you want to go learn it. It's so easy now. And I guess a good example of that is, even though it wasn't required for my job at the time, I guess when I was a field engineer at Microsoft, I was learning things like Git, how to use Git and source control with GitHub and everything, and being able to, check code out, create your branch, do the branch updates, and merge it in and everything like that. So when I went and started at Rackspace, the team I was on actually had a discovery PowerShell script that they could give to customers, to a new customer and say, hey, what does your environment look like? And it brings in all this information, creates a report or whatever. They hosted the PowerShell script out in GitHub. I think it was GitHub Enterprise internally in their environment. And they're like, yeah, if you want to add some Sky for Business stuff in there or some team stuff, go ahead. And I was able to take those things I had learned on my own with Git and source control and be able to immediately jump into the team and, create a branch, pull down the code, make my changes, create a pull request. Someone goes and reviews it. And it was finally like, oh, all these things I'd been learning on my own, even though they weren't required for my job, have finally come in and is applicable, and I can hit the road running and be able to contribute and everything. So that's where I think Don Jones, big PowerShell guy, and he works at he's pretty well known in that community and everything. He had mentioned that once on a podcast. I think it was like, your job is not your career. You might work this existing job that you have, but if your employer or your environment, if there's not something there, if they're not doing things that you want to learn, go learn it on your own. There's so many opportunities and resources out there to do that. So to be able to go out and do that is something I still struggle with it sometimes, but I finally go out and learn things and just try to keep up to date. But that's where, if I hadn't done that on my own, I would have joined this team and they would have been like, let's contribute, hey, can you contribute to this code? And it's out in source control and Git. I would have been like, I have no idea. And I would have had to just go and figure it out at that point. But I'd made that investment on my own time and it paid off. Same thing when I moved to the DevOps engineer role inside of Rackspace. I hadn't looked at Terraform yet, but I had studied a lot of ARM templates inside of Azure, the infrastructure as code and everything. Even though I had never worked with it in production, I'd written some small stuff and put it out in GitHub and practiced deployments with it and everything. Again, not a requirement of my current job. I just wanted to learn it and be prepared for that next role. And so he was asking me questions about ARM templates and everything, and I was able to answer them, even without any real world experience. So again, that's where the work I'd put in learning something in the direction I wanted to go finally paid off. So yeah, just stay curious and keep learning things that you're interested in, and hopefully it'll pay off at some point, where you can finally get into that role that you really want to get into.
So as a person who is into IT from last 15 plus years, so what do you say about my work? Have you seen any videos of mine on YouTube?
Yeah, when you sent me the invite, I went and checked out the channel. I saw that you had interviewed quite a wide variety of people, and I think that's great because you're getting lots of different experiences and perspectives and everything, especially around the world. I can give a very U.S. centric point of view, talking about how consulting works and the hours and everything like that. But that may be totally different somewhere else. So yeah, it's really cool. I was pretty impressed with some of the names or different types of roles and everything. It was just entirely technology focused. You're like talking to some authors or a radio host or something like that. So yeah, that diversity of thought is really good too, and experiences, because you can sit there and, someone might give this advice and you can take that little part, or you can take this little part over here and just be able to apply it. Again, like building skills, you don't know when that will come into play, but in 5 years, you might be able to like, oh, hey, I talked to that person once and they said this, and now I can use that. So I think it's really great.
I personally did masters in software engineering and bachelor's in computer science and engineering. So how this work? Experts like you who are already into the industry and have solved a lot of problems uh, in a lot of companies in a lot of different roles and with a lot of different people in the world. So talking with you and absorbing all this information and putting in my head how this is going to helpful for me if I work in IT.
Yeah, that's great. Especially having different roles and everything of how people get to where they're going. Like I said, I started out as a music major back in college. I was going to a regular 4-year university, and I decided, I was like, I'm not going to be a professional musician. I don't think this is going to work. And so then I went to community college, got a 2-year degree, and then later tried to go back to regular university to complete a degree, and then went to an online school. But just, yeah, all those different experiences too, education experiences, are really, interesting. There's so many different ways for people to get where they want to get now. There's coding boot camps. There's free stuff on YouTube. Things like Code Academy. Yeah, there's just tons of different ways for people to get the skills where they want to get now. It doesn't even always require, formal training. You going through bachelor's and master's, that's awesome. Like I said back in my day, I wish I had stuck with the software engineering at the college, the university level and everything. But yeah, there's so many different ways to get there, and there's no right or wrong way for sure. Yeah, so much resources out there. It's so different than when I started, where I eventually went back and got my bachelor's degree pretty much so I could check a box on a job application saying I had a bachelor's degree when it was a requirement. But I even feel like in the last, 9 or 10 years since I finished that's totally changed. I don't think that would be as much of an issue now.
So can I put this video on my YouTube channel with your permission?
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good.
Can I also put this audio and video clip on my podcast, website, internet, social media, everywhere with your permission?
Yes, oh, sounds great. Yeah, hope your viewers and everything enjoy the conversation.
Yeah, definitely they will learn a lot from you, from the experience that you said, the problems that you have solved. And also I'll put your website link on the screen. People who find our video can see your website and can see the work that you're doing. I saw there is a lot of stuff in your website.
Yeah, definitely. Just realized the other day I've been blogging for about 10 years now. Didn't realize it. I've put a lot of work into it the last couple of years. Usually my previously may just have written like 1 or 2, 3 blog posts in a year. But that's another great way, like we're talking about, to show off your experience. There's so many low cost or potentially free blogging. Go start a blog, talk about a problem that you solved, share your code out in GitHub or somewhere. Because I've had more than once, I've been in an interview and the interviewer has like, all right, well, let me go look at your GitHub page real quick. That, I put the link on my resume or whatever. And so you can actually show people what you're working on and everything like that. And that's why I originally started blogging. It was like, I want something to go past a resume, what they see on paper. If I can send them to my blog and they can, where I talk about in depth and everything. But yeah, that would be, sorry, real quick, just other advice. If someone's trying to get into IT or whatever, is, you don't have to be the best writer or anything. Just hey, here's a problem I solved, or here's some GitHub code that I wrote or whatever, and be able to share it for sure. Yeah, I appreciate it.
So thank you, Jeff, for your valuable time. Keep going, keep doing what you love, and keep inspiring the world.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And good luck with the rest of your channel and everything. It's really impressive, I think.
Yeah, thank you again.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.